This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.
All right, everybody. I'm calling to order the meeting of the Cost Efficiencies Committee for August 23rd at about 3:17. And we do have a quorum. We were waiting to have a quorum, so we do have a quorum present. And with that, I'm going to say that I don't see anybody as open time for the public. So I'm going to try and share the meeting minutes from our last meeting, which was, hello, if I can scroll it up here, hold on, which was in July 12th. If everybody's had a chance to sort of gander through those, so it was not too much heavy duty stuff. I'll just scroll down a little bit here and then you can take a look. If people have had a chance to look at that, I'll take a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay, Janet, can I have a second when anybody's ready?
Ian will second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Okay. All right. And Eliza, you were absent, maybe? Were you do you want to abstain or?
I can abstain.
Okay, perfect. All right. Thank you very much. All right. So that was that. Where to go? So two things. I guess we had talked about just briefly last time as a housekeeping matter, that especially Ian Bradley and Elise and Janet, rather, representing the clusters from your different parts of town hall. I don't know if you had a chance to reach out and share that little bit of summary with your clusters and if you got any feedback or not from anybody.
No feedback on I did share it. I did send it out and not getting any feedback.
Okay. How about Bradley? Anything?
No.
Nope. Okay. Ian?
I failed to share it and
Okay.
take responsibility for that.
Well, that's okay. It doesn't sound like there's a lot of people knocking down the door here. So if you guys are willing, I would love to have you all continue on in your roles. So unless we hear otherwise, can we assume that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I will have to check with Lucy. I don't know if the three of you have to be, Ed, would they have to be sworn in? I can't remember. Were you all sworn in before the first time, do you think? If so, you may have to get sworn in again. So that will be just I know Bob Riggs had to be because he was one of the at-large members. And I couldn't remember from you guys, but probably so. So I would assume Lucy would have to catch you again and swear you in, okay?
Okay.
All right. So one of the things that we had talked about as our kind of focus going forward was to look at this report that was done in 2016. And Eliza, this may be a little bit new to you, but I think I did send it around. Hang on. Can never scroll where I want to scroll here. Don't mind all my colors that I mark up when I read here. So this was basically a report that the select board at the time had asked for back in 2016. So this was basically a report on the structure and operations of the government, of the basically how Southampton government operates. And this report was done by this consulting firm. And over time, I've seen where this was at least brought up at a select board meeting in, I believe it was in November 2016. I saw it on the agenda mentioning that this Mr. Lynch had come and presented the report. I looked through various meeting agendas and minutes thereafter for a good share of the rest of 2016 and early 2017, and I couldn't find anywhere where there was other action on this. So I really don't know whatever became of this. It seems like it would have been something that would have had an action, maybe a motion at town meeting. And I will say I didn't get into the 2017 town meeting agenda to take a look at that. But the basic focus of this report was just to show that we might not have the most efficient structure. I'm just going to forget this overview and just come down. The basic structure of our government was not probably the most effective for our size town and the growth of town, as well as the fact that we have this real mixture, as it talks about here, a real mixture of appointed and elected officials, with, at the time, a large number of them being elected. And that obviously is still somewhat true here. We have, so the select board, the assessors, board of assessors, board of health, board of water commissioners, finance committee, personnel policy committee, treasurer collector, and town clerk. So that's a large number of elected people. At the same time, we've got many committees and boards and ad hoc groups like ourselves that are appointed. And oftentimes we find, I'm just going to scroll down to some of the relevant information here if you don't mind. We find that oftentimes it's a lot of the same people that are volunteering to be on committees. And so part of the challenge is how do we get more citizen participation, but how do we also have a more effective organization that's got more accountability, more decision-making structure, more clarity perhaps in roles and responsibilities. And so these were the kinds of things that the report had looked at. The ones that I've highlighted here in the middle are the ones that I think, in my mind, as I read it, those are the ones that we really haven't done too much on in terms of, are we prepared for the future and sort of the maximum amount of efficiency we can get, and what do we have in place to manage human resources? We're sorely lacking on the personnel side in terms of our management of human resources, I think, and also having any kind of a succession plan as people move on. As we've all seen, we've got it currently with the fire chief having left. We've got the water superintendent retiring in a couple of weeks. We've got Ed, who's planning on leaving us anyway at the end of December. So there's lots of key people that have been around for 5 years or more that are moving on, and we don't have really an in-house plan to to sort of fill that or prepare people to maybe some of those positions are not ones that can be filled internally, but some might be where somebody would be sort of moving up the ladder, but we don't have that kind of a structure in place, basically. So this report came up with a variety of findings and basically found that some of our deficiencies were just, for their point of view anyway, were kind of inherent to the kind of structure that we have, the way that our government has been set out. And what they're actually recommending is to go to a basically a home rule position or form of government. So we may not want to jump right into that, but I just do want to take one thing here that I think is still quite true. This is the, in spite of some of their findings, which were somewhat on the sort of mixed, I guess, but, just pointing out a lot of deficiencies in areas where we could do better in terms of efficiencies and improvement. These are the things that they did highlight, which I think actually are very, very valid to note. Committed and conscientious elected officials that care about the town, devoted, talented department heads interested in the purpose of their departments, willingness of some citizens to serve or volunteer in elected and appointed positions, dedicated, forward-looking town administrator who's worked to implement a number of pro-management strategies, improve financial management practices, including better coordinated budget process and financial policies, and improve financial stability, partly attributable to improved financial management practices. So I think that was true as a finding that they came up with at the end of 16, and I think that really still rings true, pretty much, 7 years later. And they came down through a whole structure here of findings. And what I would like to do is just really kind of jump to the recommendations and see if we can take a look at a couple of the recommendations, because their findings were, what they saw at the time. Some things have changed, but they did note here that our structure is extremely flat and also extremely fragmented. So that really does have an impact on communications and coordination and how we use our resources. So here they've got down, for example, executive authority are scattered really across some 20 different bodies or officials, And so that's kind of a bit of a challenge. So we have a mixture, I think, from Ed's point of view as a town administrator, kind of, being able to manage things at town hall. Some days it can be challenging because you've got appointed officials where we might have more of a say in how they do their work or what they need to do, whereas the elected officials we don't have quite as much say over because they actually report right back to the voters, right? So there's a kind of a mixture, I guess I would say, of personnel and possible issues and decision making and all those kinds of things that come up, and sometimes it can lead to some levels of conflict. It may not be the easiest to get things done. So those are some of their findings. And I'm not going to turn this because I'll probably lose my page, but this just showed the flat structure of all of our town entities. So this is really the one thing that they were really talking about. So it's interesting here that, what they're talking here about as their identification was this lack of coordination or inadequate coordination, possible, different decision making coming from different parts of the organization because of that lack of coordination, duplication of resources, lost opportunities for economies of scale, etc. And it's interesting because if we think back to a couple of years ago when we started the Cost Efficiencies Committee, we didn't necessarily have this wording, but this was some of the genesis for why the committee exists, right? Is how do we look at, being more effective, being more responsive to our citizens? How do we look at doing things more efficiently and with some cost savings and more timely, et cetera? So I think, the rationale for the committee is kind of even grounded in this, even though we didn't really know this at the time. But then it really does, I think, lead us to us taking a second look at this report. So I'm going to skip through the findings and just get right on down to the recommendations real quick here, if I can do that, of course, when everything works here. And if you haven't had a chance to read this, do try to skim through it at least, and we'll come back to it. But I would like to try and see if we can take this in a couple of meetings and a couple of different chunks here. Let's see. So one of the things, I'm not sure I'm yet at am I at the right ones yet? Am I at here yet? Nope, I'm at the very end of this. But they talk about, our bylaws not being very organized, and they seem to be kind of ad hoc, that whenever there's an issue, we create a new bylaw. That's apparently how it was working in the past. And so some of our policies and just how we operate was a challenge apparently at the time. So basically coming down to the recommendations chapter here, they ended up with probably 8 different recommendations. And I don't know if we want to establish the home rule charter as a first thing. I think that we might lead ourselves into looking at other things first and then determine if this is really a way we would go. This would be a totally different way of government, and would require some work on our part, but also it would have to go before the town meeting, obviously, but it would also have to go before the legislature to actually authorize this special act charter, I believe, to actually get something changed within our structure of government. So we may not want to tackle recommendation number 1 just yet, but I think we can come back to it. So number 2, though, was updating local bylaws and legislative actions in a local code. And I will say that this is something that we have actually worked on for the past year or two. As part of the Bylaw Advisory Committee, I've been working with Francine and Virginia Earhart and Taylor Siebold to update various bylaws. And then the zoning board has been doing their update. The planning board has been doing their update of the zoning bylaws. And over the last couple of years, we had engaged with a firm to do a codification of those bylaws. I'm going to stop sharing just for a second here, see if I can share one more thing. And this was called the E-Code 360, which is coming online as soon as our town meeting results are approved by the Attorney General. We had a town meeting in May, and we're waiting on approval of bylaws from the Attorney General. And once that happens, this will be going into place. So this is the town of Hadley. So as soon as this goes into place, Southampton's bylaws are going to look a lot like this without going into great detail, but it's going to be all automated. It's going to be organized. It's going to be cross-tabbed. It's going to be searchable. It's going to be a whole lot more user-friendly than the structure that we have right now on our website. And so these are all organized in terms of various topics, and ours is maybe even broken out into a couple of different headings, not just under the general bylaws. I think we have a couple of subheadings, but it's going to make it very easy for somebody to get into. So I don't know, for example, if you hit on Capital Planning Committee, then it comes into how this all gets established, what they do, the budget report, etc. So then all the relevant pieces of the bylaw are much more findable, I guess I would say, in this kind of a format. Let me just see if I just didn't lose that. Go back one more time. One more time, maybe. Let's see. There we go. And then at the very end, and I think ours will be the same, once you go down and get through all the various bylaws that we have now, there's a separate section that's all going to be on the zoning bylaws. So zoning will have its own section under the E360. And I think at some point, Ian, we may end up with some of these, the rules and regulations may go in there too. I'm not quite sure if we had already given that or that's something we can add to. But just to say that we have made major progress with the bylaws, and this is what ours is going to be starting to look like. And this is just to show you a sample of one that is pretty similar, I think, to what we'll be doing. So that's one thing where I think we can kind of cross that right off the list, because that's one that we've dealt with. So number 2, in terms of the recommendation, I'm going to say that we've really been able to do that for the most part. Number 3 is maybe where we can focus a little bit today, and just talk about, if I can scroll down here. So the number of independent elected boards and officials, etc. So I don't know why that got highlighted, but anyway. So what was being recommended here was to look at restructuring how we have so many boards and committees, etc. And apparently this is something that came out, and oddly enough, the proposed structure, I think it is shown in here in the report a little bit later on, but it's a bit more logical in terms of hierarchy compared to the flat structure we have right now. And then apparently this had been a similar finding with a recommendation based on what Department of Revenue had recommended apparently over past numbers of years. And I don't know if that's been true recently, but this would be, if you can look sideways a little bit, this is how this would kind of change compared to the structure that you had seen before that was extremely flat. So this would be a very, very different looking structure. And again, I'm not going to turn it because I know I'll lose it. So the idea here, I guess, would be that they're advocating in this report anyway for more appointed officials rather than elected officials. I think that's the bottom line of what they're trying to say here. And then that does probably limit some policymaking responsibilities on their part. It's really much more providing some advisory, administrative support advice, I think. And it really, I don't know, it seems the way they're recommending this is that it helps with the functioning of the entire town government. So one of the things that they put out here, and I think this is where we can just sort of talk about it. I have no opinion one way or another here, but this whole notion about changing the structure, and one of their first things here is recommending that there be a DPW established. And so this would be a DPW to achieve efficiencies, as it's mentioned here, both in staffing, resources, as well as equipment. And it's interesting that what they're looking at here would be not just public works, which would be in our case combining, I guess, water and highway, but also folding in there park and cemetery commissions, which would be kind of a new idea, along with a finance committee appointed by the town moderator, a personnel policy board being renamed to be an advisory board so that they basically are appointed by the select board rather than being elected. And they would be much more on an advisory level, as the name suggests, to help us with personnel policies. And I think one of the challenges we have is that, other than 2 or 3 exceptions that I can think of looking back over history, most of the people that have served on the personnel policy board, while they've been, fine as volunteers, only 2 or 3 of them perhaps have had real live HR experience in their careers to really manage or be involved heavily in an HR department to bring that kind of expertise to the position. So sometimes it's been a challenge, I think, for us. And I know this would then be another notion here, treasurer collector and town clerk, which are now both elected positions. The recommendation here is for those to be appointed, as well as the tree warden, as well as the almoners. So whatever. So this is kind of where I'd like to just open up a discussion, and I'll stop talking and just see what anybody has for any thoughts or any questions, and I'll do my best to look at them. But I think this would be an area where we ought to take a look and say, okay, is this something, it came up at one point in time, and I know when I was running for select board in 2000, 18, I guess it was, one of the questions I got asked in the sort of candidate forum was, well, what do you think about us having a DPW? And frankly, I didn't know anything about it because I didn't know that this issue had ever come up. So this had apparently come up in 2016, and whatever reason it was, did not go anywhere, since we do have a separate water commission and a separate highway department. So with our water super retiring and the difficulties we've had filling positions, certainly at the highway department, and there's not a plethora of personnel over at the water department level. There's only two employees, or the water super and an employee, I believe. And then, just filling those positions, I know at highway has been a real challenge for Randall, as he talked about when he came and met with us. And, part of it is having, the level of licensing and all of those things that are really required. It requires a different pay grade than we've probably been able to, support in the past. We've made headway on that, I think, over the last year and a half, but we still may be in a challenging position in terms of competitiveness with other towns. So with that, let me shut up and just get some early reaction. But I'd like to sort of just take a look at this particular recommendation and just see what anybody's thoughts are, or if those of you that were around in 17 or so and have any recollection of whatever happened to this report, or even just the topic of forming a DPW, what was the level of discussion? What was the sort of the pros and cons from anything you might remember, or anybody you might know that would remember that we could reach out to?
So Chris, I just the first opening of this section, it talks on doing it by using the home rule charter. So
right.
We don't have that. So I know
we don't yet.
But it sounds like you need that to have this, or is that just the way that was written? The very first sentence, I think, in that section was
in the very first, right. And I guess I thought that maybe we needed to look at some of these other recommendations that would argue for why it would be worth doing the home rule charter. But I could be totally wrong.
I don't know. Go ahead.
The home rule charter is a big lift. Everything I've heard since I've been here is it's not a popular idea. We could pull bits and pieces out of this and start by moving forward with them and doing them through special legislation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not even just here, Chris, but under that section, it talked about through the home rule charter. So I didn't know if that's the only way to do it. I guess that was my question.
Okay. Underwear. So this is a little bit right here. So recommended the town utilize a special act charter process. And I think, Ed, correct me if I'm wrong, we did something last year or so for tied into home rule, right? When it was Pure Food wanted a liquor license, was that right?
Yeah, that was through the special legislation process. Yes.
Right, but that kind of tied into home rule, right? Or not?
Not
No,
really.
Not really. Okay. Okay.
It's special legislation, but not really home rule.
I see. Okay. All right. My mistake. Okay. So Janet, you were talking about where I was in the blue part before?
It says something adopting in addition to adopting.
Right here.
Right here. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Right here. Yep. Yeah.
In your highlighted paragraph, the town should through a home charter. So is there other way to do it as, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, again, and again, I'm not overly familiar with the home rule charter, but I think as Ed was alluding to that, this might be, to take on the entire thing all at once and try to go at it, sort of top down might be a challenge. And that's where I didn't know whether if we were taking, bits and pieces of it and slowly, getting it, in that direction or in a more efficient direction. But I don't totally know.
I mean, is there a way to do it without adopting that? So that was more my question, and maybe we don't have.
Yeah. So maybe Ed, could you tell us how this might work? I mean, how does the special act legislation or whatever work such that we're kind of starting to comply or push in the direction of a home rule charter, but not necessarily fully engaged in it yet? Is that the idea, sort of? You're muted, Ed. Sorry.
Yeah, it's basically a question of, okay, how do we get to the end? And, do we think the people of Southampton are upset enough with the form of government to take on doing an entire change through adopting a charter, which Southampton doesn't have, or are we better off trying to do bits and pieces of it through the special legislation process? The charter itself becomes, shall we say, a big lift or onerous only because of the fact that, okay, you got to elect a charter commission to do that. They're the ones that come back with the, shall we say, suggested charter and put it before the voters. Special legislation follows a little bit along the lines of somewhat like a bylaw or what have you, except you're sending it back to the legislation. So you develop that almost like a bylaw piece, have it approved by the town at a town meeting, and then much like that, shall we say, special legislation for the additional liquor license, it gets sent off to the legislature for the votes from the House and the Senate to approve it, and then on to the governor's desk for signing.
So require town meeting at all, or it happens after town meeting?
What's that?
Does it require town meeting approval before it goes to the legislature?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. I know the bits and pieces we have tried in the past haven't been successful, like the treasurer collector and a town clerk being elected or appointed versus elected.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I mean, it makes sense to me, and I'll let somebody else speak. Sorry, but the parks. I mean, highway is so involved in maintaining our parks and cemetery and working with the water department. It just seems like there's already some integration that exists that might be more efficient if it were more streamlined into a DPW. That's just my observation.
So these commissions would essentially go, I mean, cemetery and parks, for example, would cease to exist, is what this is really saying, right? And that, I mean, I think of other things.
Not necessarily.
Okay. Yeah. Because I think of things, I mean, mowing the grass is one thing, or, maintaining the property. But, when I look at, like the permits to use the park and, all those kinds of things, or the the permits to bury somebody. I mean, I don't see that being part of the DPW's effort, right? So,
yeah, there are different ways to do things like this, and it's like, okay, if you still need, whether you call it a board or something else to do some of those things, question, because if they're currently elected, do you try to make them appointed? Do you leave them elected? Or in that bylaw special legislation piece, do you specifically change or limit their duties to, like, policy making, or in case of cemetery commissioners, selling and recording the
Plots.
Burial plots.
Burial plots, things like that. And with the park commission, again, you change their responsibilities. So again, maybe they're not elected, they're appointed, and their responsibilities or duties become again, like, okay, policy making for the park and doing the reservations and things like that.
I mean, this uses the word abolished, so that's
yeah, right. I mean, you can do it that way too. Does it mean abolish it in its current state and create it somewhere else? I mean, I can tell you in West Springfield that I'm very familiar with, community of 28,000 people that had a DPW. The charter change didn't eliminate the parks. Well, what's a Parks and Recreation Committee, but they still had a function. However, the maintenance of the fields was, and the parks was the responsibility under at the time DPW. It's been transgressed into a central maintenance responsibility, but you can do little things like that. Well, I mean, one of the things that I've said is, okay, can we create a financial department that actually consists of the town accountant, the treasurer collector's office, and the board of assessors. And one of the pieces I've said along that line, even if the board of assessors stayed elected rather than being appointed, is there a way through that legislation to limit their responsibilities to the fact that, okay, they are the policymakers and the exemption and abatement approvers, but they do not have the responsibility of running the office or hiring or firing.
It's similar, I guess, to a mayor and a city council, right, Ed?
I mean, it's different. I mean, there's so many forms of government, of whether it's mayor, town manager. Basically, there's two sides of it. You've got the shall we say the executive side, which here is the select board, and the legislative side is town meeting. In another form of government, the executive side could be that town manager or a mayor, and the executive side could be a town council or city council. What's happening here is there's so many policymakers and different responsibilities for hiring and firing in different departments and running of the departments that no one's grabbing the fire hose and going in the right direction.
I think that the basis of our town government is really volunteerism right now, right, with the government of it. Yeah, and I think volunteerism is diminishing. I think that civic interest in volunteerism it's trending. It's been this way now. Well, the amount of volunteers 20 years ago was much different than it is right now. We're having a hard time, finding quorums or even people to voluntarily enlist in committees. And I think we really need to plan in the future for this, because it's going to continue to trend that way. I really believe it is. And just a perfect example of this is we talk about cost efficiencies, and this has nothing to do with the dedicated volunteers of our town, because they're the only ones that are volunteering, and they're doing this for free. But when you only have a committee meeting once a month, and you need that committee for continuity of your own operations, and they can't find a quorum, or they don't have enough people to meet, that has a significant impact, especially on a department like mine, for hiring purposes, or any other department. And this is something that we really need to start thinking about, because I believe volunteerism is going to continue to decline. And if that's the case, and that's the form of our government, we're going to be in a world of trouble in 10 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think as much as volunteering is declining, I agree with you, Ian, is, the number of people setting up for election is also declining. Mm-hmm. I mean, we barely have enough, and we didn't fill all the slots that were open this year at this year's election. We have to have the town caucus, or we still have the town caucus as a method to nominate people for election, possibility there. But, that's a struggle to get 25 people to come to the caucus to even put forward a slate of people. And certainly, I think, I forget the numbers that Lucy told us, but it was a very poor turnout on this year's election, for example. And granted, with a town election without anything else going on, big time, it doesn't usually get the turnout. So, it's a challenge in general, and whether people are just not as civically minded as they might have been years ago.
Well, they might not have the time either. It's
both.
It's really I'm not being critical of it. I'm just
no, it's true.
I'm stating the obvious, and this could dismantle, operations in several years where we don't have, if I need to hire somebody and I just can't go to Ed or the town administrator and say I need to hire somebody, and Ed can say, okay, what do you have? Okay, go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
What then?
Yeah.
And that's not just for my department. That's any department.
Sure. No, that's a good point. Good point. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Anybody else have any thoughts on this? And Bradley or Lisa or anything? No, I don't know how it's working at the school. Lisa was just telling us before we all got online about all the changes in the school district with all sorts of new hires. So congratulations for being able to find all those people for various key positions at the school administrative level anyway. But so this is one that we might figure out how to tackle. I think this is one that bears some attention, because it might help us in the long term. Let me just scroll down to a couple of others here that I think fit in the.
It's a worthwhile endeavor to dig into.
Okay. Yeah. And the other couple, establish a formal position of a town administrator. And I'm not totally sure what we don't have. We have, so what this does here, this says recommend that the Home Rule Charter outline in detail the authority and responsibilities of the town administrator position as the primary authority within the town, lead the financial management, procurement, personnel, collective bargaining, hiring and firing of department heads, supervise personnel, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a recommendation here. Now let me stop this for a second and show you two things. We actually have online somewhat, we have a bylaw per se for the town administrator. This is the existing bylaw. It's very short. Mm-hmm. So it serves as an agent of the select board, with responsibilities delegated by the select board, and may not be a voting member, and you act as the chief administrative procurement officer and chief financial officer. So that's the existing bylaw that we have. So I guess when they're saying establish, in more full force, if you will, the role of the town administrator, this, even though we have a bylaw, it doesn't really tell anybody much.
A perfect example of this?
Yep.
And it's what's going on with dispatch right now.
Yep.
We're in a situation where we need decisions made. And if the select board, yourself included, did not allow Ed and I the autonomy to start making our own decisions as far as purchases and going forward with this move, what we did in 2 weeks would take us probably 2 months.
Mm-hmm. Oh, at least.
And the fact that you gave us that autonomy made this more efficient.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's good. It's a good example. Yeah. But I mean, just to say that, when they talk about formally establishing the role of the town administrator, I think was established back in, I don't know, 2010 or maybe even earlier per se, that role. But what, I don't even know what the word is, how strong it is, how meaningful it is, just as a bylaw, is kind of questionable in my mind.
They made changes, Chris,
I'm sorry?
The town definitely made changes, and I don't know if it was in a bylaw, but giving the town administrator, probably more before you came back, more authority than they'd ever had in the past. So probably
Right.
at the first town administrator that had this much authority. Other than that, they were more of an administrator.
Yeah.
I mean, Heather had some authority, but not as much autonomy, I think. So
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. So, and just to say that whereas that may not exist, some of the recommendations that were in that report may not exist in the
Bylaw.
actual little bylaw, in the job description, and this was developed in 2017, is basically the core of what Ed has been operating under as well. So the job description is about, I don't know, 4 pages long or something. Clearly, chief administrative officer with, umpteen million things, delineated underneath that. Chief procurement officer, personnel director, negotiates all collective bargaining for the town in conjunction with the select board. Many duties. Manages town workers' compensation, injured duty programs. Chief financial officer for the town, budget director, responsible for maintenance and preparation of the town capital improvement plan. Legal counsel. I mean, all this stuff, whenever it got revised in 2017, I mean, I have never seen a position, frankly, where in one person you've got this many hats.
He only has a part-time administrative assistant.
Correct. So it's media relations, it's the management of property, it's it's all this stuff. So I guess, as I look at, sort of the disconnect between the job description, which is quite detailed, and, the bylaw, which is, pretty minimal, I guess I don't know whether that's something that, as we look at this report, what that means to try and establish, did I take the wrong one? I bet I did. Just a second. I bet I took the wrong report here. Hold on. I think I did. Let's try this one again. To a formal position of the town administrator. Maybe this is something that would be kind of easy to take on because we've got the guts of it already put in place in the job description. So I don't know, Ed, your thoughts on this? It concerns you, obviously, or your position.
Oh, I just sent you something.
Okay.
Just as an example, and yeah, you will see a huge difference between what's in this bylaw and I just picked one out. There's a bunch of different ones. I just sent you a charter from a different community that actually has Article 4 has the town administrator in it.
Okay.
But you will see a big difference.
Yeah. So is this something that doesn't seem like this would be that heavy a lift?
No, I mean, it's, again, you're doing it, you're writing it, then it needs to be approved by
just the time
legislative body, the town meeting, and what have you. So, I mean, it is a lift, and it's somewhat complicated. But I have joked since I've been here that really I don't exist, only because of the fact that other than, I mean, you've got the little bylaw, but there's nothing here, because you can see how small the bylaw is, that really backs up that, whether you call it profile or job description, that I was hired under.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I could actually say, you baited and switched on me.
But I mean, in terms of trying to do this special act kind of thing, would it be a matter of putting more of the the guts of what's in the job description right now into a bylaw? Is that how that would go?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. That's where I was assuming. So anyway, just to say I just wanted to show people where that is. Strengthening the budget process is another one where I think we've made headway on here. Interesting to note too that they're talking about basically the town administrator being the lead in the budgeting process, allowing the select board to be more the policymaker type folks, and allow the finance committee to maximize their effectiveness and their expertise. And that's something I think we're moving towards, or we're trying to hope for with this finance committee, is to get them more involved on a regular basis. Not that, as this third paragraph says here, budgeting is a continuous process throughout the year. So it shouldn't be just that, finance committee comes in at, budget time, but they're helping us all along. And I think there's already been one joint meeting, right, Bradley, with you and maybe Jen, to kind of, with the finance committee, to kind of take a look at, the expense reports and so forth, and just, going back and forth on things to make sure that things are okay as we go along throughout the year. So I think we made some progress on this one. And then the other one is on strengthen and streamline the personnel function. So this is probably, the one where we are still having the biggest issue here, just in terms of having, really a good, solid human resource department. We don't, per se. I mean, I think it's been a challenge to get people to serve on the Personnel and Policy Board. And like I say, I know there's been in the past at least 2 or 3 people that I'm aware of that have got, that had, very particular, HR experience in their backgrounds that really made them invaluable to the board. But, this is one too, where, as Ian says, if they don't have a quorum, they don't meet. And then we all kind of get stuck and end up, doing an end run to get something done. So anyway, just to say that those are the main ones out of this pile of things here. Those would be the ones that I would think, if we were to take on anything, that we might look at any of the above that we talked about, just as a way to start, and then see, what makes sense, and could we do small bites of something here, or study it further, but then take some small bites and actually move it toward town meeting and legislation, and eventually work our way toward the idea of a home rule charter. That would be my thought about how to approach this, but I'm totally open to anybody's ideas on here. It just feels like it's the right time to take a look at this again. And I don't know, maybe you don't agree. And if you don't, say so.
I agree. I think if we don't start looking at this, we're going to be in a world of hurt in several years.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not.
Yeah, I would encourage you starting down the road. I would very strongly encourage you to start looking at it.
Yeah.
And then you also might want to take a look at the option of actually, instead of having chiefs, have one commissioner. And actually, that would save us some time and money right now. And doing the search for a fire EMS chief, we just make Ian the commissioner over both those departments.
There we go.
Yeah, do you notice my hair is getting thinner and thinner? Just on a weekly basis.
What hair, Ian?
Yeah, that's my point.
You're one of the few people I actually know of and deal with that has less hair than I do.
I don't know about that, but
and we're both turning grayer besides losing it by the minute.
That too, yeah. Elisa, you were going to say something?
No, I was just going to agree that what we went over today and the topics seem pretty, the low-hanging fruit, as we would say. They're sort of easier topics, I think, from everything else to try to tackle.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Again, this is 2016 information, and the only thing that was really done, other than a new job description for the town administrator and update the bylaw process, everything else was kind of pushed to the side, apparently. So,
well, I wouldn't say pushed to the side. Don't forget, have made attempts at changing elected officers to appointed over the years, and while we've had success at town meeting, have been shot down at the ballot box.
Good point. Yep.
Yeah.
We did that numerous times.
Yeah. And that wouldn't change, right? As we went toward a home rule charter. I mean, if you still would do the town meeting vote and the ballot box, right? Or no?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, okay.
Correct.
So the process is still the same.
And the case where you're changing from an elected to an appointed official, yes.
Yeah. So the process is still the same, both
Yeah.
town meeting and at the ballot box. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Well, anyway, so that's I think we have had just a bit of an overview today, but I'd like to just sort of suggest that we kind of take a look at those 3 or 4 sections in particular on the recommendation. So it's basically recommendations 2 through 6, I think. All of them are the ones, but we were focusing on number 3 in particular with the changing to appointed persons, perhaps, and see if we can't figure out a way to delve into that a little bit more and, see what recommendations we come up with. We may not agree with everything that's in there, and there may be others that should be on the list of things that could be combined that make more sense in today's world. I mean, again, we have to keep in mind that report is 7 years old, but it does seem to have some relevance still. So I think that's what makes me feel like it's important to pick it up and not just let it collect dust on a shelf.
Any suggestions on other communities that are similar to us in size and stuff that maybe have made some of these changes?
Well, I actually reached out as was in the minutes from last meeting. I did reach out to Eric Weiss at PVPC to ask that question and see if they could be of any help to us. He's on vacation this week, unfortunately, so couldn't be here. But I will get back in touch with him because he was going to check out. He didn't have anything off the top of his head in terms of their working with other communities that might have gone toward home rule. But he was going to double check that with some of his colleagues, and so I'll use that as at least a resource to find out whether there's anybody else that we might tap into there.
I'll reach out to the stand members too.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that'd be helpful. Yeah. So with that, before we almost adjourned, we were talking about a meeting. How soon again would you like to meet? We've got maybe either in a couple weeks, that would be the 6th, or in a month, that would be the 20th.
So the 6th for me is always hard because it's a COA board meeting at 4.
Yeah.
First Wednesday of the month typically. So
I'm
not available on the 13th. So
okay.
The 20th works for me.
20th would work.
I'm gone for training the 19th, 20th, and the 21st.
Okay.
But by all means, still have the meeting.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, again,
we have our
on the 6th if we were going to do it on the 6th. So
okay,
that's good for everybody to do it at an earlier time or not.
So the timing would be more like 2:30ish. Is that what you're saying, Janet?
Or maybe 2-ish.
2-ish.
2:30, whichever.
Yeah.
If it's an hour, 2:30 works. If we go over, I'll just depart. As I move from this house to I could set up a town hall at 2, I guess.
Yeah. How does September 6th sound to other people at more like at 2:00?
It's ice cream social time at the school.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, but that's okay because the ice cream social is not till 6. I'm just staying through. So that day does work.
Oh, that is okay.
And
so
it's
maybe
not. I was thinking it was the first day of school, but the first day of school.
that was your wish. It wasn't until September 6th. You were wishing first day was September 6th. We know. We know.
After Labor Day would be good.
Yeah. So is that any better, Ian, for you or Bradley? How about you?
The 6th works for me.
Okay, well let's try the 6th at 2:00, okay? And see if we can make that work. And I'll send some information around and see what we can try to focus on. Okay?
Sounds good.
Good. So with that, could I have a motion to adjourn, please? All right, Janet, can I have a second?
I've got a question.
Yeah.
I'm
okay. Very good. You got me.
I'll second.
Lisa second. Okay. All those in favor? Aye. All right. Perfect. We're
Good
adjourned.
shot, Ian.
Perfect. Perfect.
We're adjourned at 4:11. Thanks.
This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.